Hey, today is something of a re-review-ish of the Cold Steel Code 4. And do you know how many times I've said Code Steel Cold 4? Many times. I had this knife 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago. I had a quick look at it. It didn't really grab me at first, but it's really seemed to become like an evergreen cold steel. It's one that you still see a lot of folks buying and enjoying. So I thought, you know what, I might have another go at that one. In the spirit of this channel being the least on the cutting edge of all the knife channels. Yes, this is this knife from about 4 years ago. It's been an AUSA, then XHP, and now an S35 VN is today's review. So we're going to look at it, how it performs, how it's made, what's good about it. We're going to compare it a bit to the Spyderco Enduro, which is a similar sized and type of knife, mid-back lock, about the same-ish price, give or take $10 or $15 in Australia. So we're looking at the Code 4, and yeah, should be a little interesting ride for you, I hope. Let's get to it. Alright, so the Code 4, I've given it a good old run around, done a lot of normal stuff with it, and then done some idiot knife stuff with it as well, just because it's cold steel and, you know, that stuff seems to play well in knife reviews, and it's fun to do. So, there we go. My thoughts on this one, well, I guess I'll get out of the way, I'll show it against some other similar knives and you get some size comparisons going. First up, the Spyderco Stretch, a very similarly sized knife. The American Lawman, another similarly sized knife with a slightly shorter cutting edge and a forward finger choil. The Benchmade 940, a slightly smaller knife with a cutting edge of about the same length, a much slimmer and lighter package with an axis lock. A little bit jazzier. Speaking of jazzy locks, the Buck Marksman, about the same size and possibly for about the same purpose. The Spyderco Para 3, much more comfortably in the pure EDC category, being about an inch and even a little bit more than an inch shorter, smaller cutting edge, more compact handle, more lightweight, deeper carry. And then the Victorinox Explorer, one of the Victorinoxes that I have used the most, indicative of the size of pretty much most of the Victorinoxes you probably get. There are some slightly larger ones. This is about the standard size, so it's a, on the larger size of being a knife, whilst certainly being probably one of the more mid-sized to smaller of the cold steel folding line in particular. So you get an S35 VN blade, hollow ground, you get an aluminium handle which has had some kind of anodization done to it. It's almost like it depends on what you look, it depends on how you look at it. It's almost like an olive green, or is it a grey? I think it's really almost up to the perceptions of the user. But yeah, it's a nice kind of subdued colour. It's got the Triad Lock, which is a modified style lockback with an extra pin in it that really does magnify the strength. And it's got a tip up only carry on the left or the right side. But if you want the right side or the left side, whichever one's opposite to how it comes, you have to actually attach a separate clip, which does come in the box. It's a thumb stud deployer. You can see the thumb stud is slightly longer on the deployment side. You can use a flat screwdriver and swap that over if you want your knife to be truly left-handed. Whether you'd have too much difficulty hitting it with the short side with your left hand, let's have a look. I'm pretty sure that yes, that is still a pretty workable thumb stud, but hey, the extra depth may do you well. If you are a lefty, you can swap it over and make yourself a left-handed Code 4, which is very cool. You're looking at a weight of 120 grams. Compared that to, say, the Spyderco Enduro, which is 95 grams, you get a relatively lightweight knife still, and it's about at that point where I struggle to feel, you know, without knowing the difference is too much between these two. So what's great about the Cold Steel Code 4? I'll tell you what's great about the Code 4. This is one of the best performing blades that I've had in a long time. This is a really excellent combination of blade shape. I'm really glad I got the clip point. I much prefer it to the spear. It's got a really good sort of piercing tip that still maintains some strength because it is swedged. So great shape, coming in line with a great grind. So a really nice acute hollow grind that gets very nice and thin behind the edge. And what seems to be a really well treated S35 VN steel. So there was a bit of an outcry about it when Cold Steel swapped from XHP to S35. You know, fair enough, perhaps. It's got a slight decrease in edge retention as far as my testing goes, but as I'm sort of trying to get across lately, it's still nothing you can complain about. This is going to cut a long time for your standard user. And when you start doing bigger, sillier things with it, well, some of those big, silly things, no matter how good the steel is, it's going to be dull by the end of the job. So my use of this involved using it for heaps of food prep, heaps of just around the house cutting, opening things, all that sort of stuff, the stuff that you pull your pocket knife out to do without really even thinking about it. So I used a whole bunch of that. Then I also did my rope cut test. I did my rope cut test with a partially used factory edge. So I'd actually started doing my review cutting already, and then I went and did my rope cut test just off the factory edge, and it still cut the rope 250 times. And that is an excellent number. Like for S35, factory edge, partially used, it was still slicing a sheet of paper, I guess, but that does indicate to me a really good heat treat, or at least a heat treat geared very well towards holding an edge. So very, very cool. Is it brittle though? Well, the next thing I did was I took it out and used it as kind of like a giant can opener. We had this rusted out old laundry trough that the dogs were getting, they were drinking from it, but then the galvanization started to wear off, so it was getting rusty. So they don't want your dogs drinking rust water, so it needed to go. I cut the bottom out so I could stamp it out, and I wore away all the way around it, and it is really much like a can opener effect. Actually sliding the edge down through the metal, not a nice thing to do to a knife. And you know what? Yes, it made the knife so it doesn't any longer slice a held sheet of paper. Sure, that's pretty predictable, but there really isn't any edge deformation that I could see that isn't going to just sharpen out. So, and just with a normal sharpening, rather than having to dig out chips or really badly done flat spots. In fact, it's still a perfectly acceptable working edge. And when I run my finger along it, there isn't really a particularly single horrible spot. It's just kind of, frankly, it's probably the level that most of our family and friends knives are at all the time. So a really well done heat treatment on an excellent blade that on its own, on a different handle even, this is almost ideal. This is almost ideal blade for me. It's really, really well done. I mean, nicer steels are always great. We all want Vanax in our lives, don't we? But I think for what they've done with it, it is about optimized. So really, really well done blade, cold steel. Absolutely top class. The handle is aluminium, and it is relatively ergonomic for me. I'm never the biggest fan of sort of actual finger indentations and grooves and whatnot. I find it can get a little bit particular when you're doing like a longer task. It's just kind of another part to unsettle against your hand and give you a bit of a hot spot. This one's actually not too bad. I would still prefer if they just went a good old straighter handle like, say, the Stretch here, just a nice sort of more gentle swoop. But you know what? It's not the Stretch, it's the Code 4. This would have its applications, and I suppose when I was stabbing down into that bucket, this nice sort of steep Quillion, whatever. And it's obviously going to hold your hand in a bit more secure for the stabbing tasks and the heavier tasks, which is necessary because it is also quite a smooth handle. Very sort of subtly cut jimps here, like exactly three of them, aren't really going to do the job of grip, so by all means they had to do something, and that's absolutely fine. Rather than us having to put skateboard tape on the end as the end user, I guess it's about as good as you can get if you're after a sort of a nice, sleek, thin aluminium handled knife. But it does come with the trade-offs of having a thin aluminium handle. It's got it moves about in your hands a little bit. I did my rope cut test with it. It was an adequately comfortable knife. Not the best. I found this channel eventually starting to sort of, as the knife gently swiveled back to forth, kind of burrows its way into your index finger there just a little bit. It's not an ergonomically bad knife, but it's probably not my preferred handle, shape, size, type, all that sort of stuff. It's thin, which does mean it carries really low profile in the pocket. In fact, this may be the thinnest knife I've got at the moment, I reckon. Even the Endura, apart from the Almar Falcon, I suppose, but even the Endura is a little bit more hefty than the Code 4. Probably a different footprint and a slimmer footprint in other ways, but in terms of thinness, it's even got a little edge over the Endura. And that's, I guess, a good place to get to land, so to speak. This and the Endura are two really great, just honest working knives. I've sort of had this concept in my head lately of knives that are just at that apex of buy once, cry once, that'll meet the needs of anyone who's not going to go off and become a knife spaz like me, but then also wants something that's, could almost be seen as an optimum knife. And these two are really, really good for that, I think. For your end user who's not a knife guy. The VG10 in this is easily trumped by the S35VN pretty much in most cases. But even still, my point stands. The Endura is like a really nice, lightweight, low impact knife that's nice and accessible. And this does a very similar job, as does the American Lawman. If you're after something with a forward finger control, the Lawman's possibly the superior one to get. But yeah, these two both do a great job of being that. So let's just talk about the differences and how one is better than the other and all that sort of business, because I like a bit of a comparison. So in terms of pocket carry, the Endura is a better knife to carry in the pocket, even though it isn't as thin. The Endura has a pocket clip which doesn't frustrate me as much as the Cold Steel one. The Cold Steel pocket clip is just too low here with the ramping. I'll need to take this off and actually, which is silly because I took it apart before and I didn't do it. I'll just need to add a bit of a higher ramp to it so it goes into my pocket a bit easier. There's that, and there's also a bit of a broader, wider knife in your pocket, as in it takes up more space this way sort of thing. So if you've got it next to things, the Endura is a slicker package for sure. So there's that. The Endura carry is just a little bit better. I find the Endura is a bit more ergonomic. I prefer the basic shape handle of the Endura, the Ergonomics. Even though it does still have some, markings for your fingers, you can put 2 fingers here, you can put 1 finger here and choke back. Much more neutral, and I find it happier in my hand having the Endura, for sure. The lock, the Cold Steel has the stronger lock. You can do ridiculous things with an axis lock, stuff that you don't ever need to do, but if you're just curious, yeah, you can wail on this with a mallet, you can batten wood with it, all that sort of good stuff. And yeah, it'll eventually fail, probably from the aluminium, I would say, is going to be the thing that fails. Your screws might strip out in the aluminium from the vibrations. I would guess that would happen before this Triad Lock explodes on you or whatever. When you look at the Triad Lock, and I'll show you still of this knife actually broken down, you can see it has this extra pin in it that sort of stops the blade between the locking leaf, and that pin, being a cylindrical object, holds an immense amount of pressure before it fails. So that's what the strength of the Triad Lock comes from. And it's also interesting to see when this is open, it's got these really good, big, generous bronze phosphor washers. The Endura has good washers as well, but this is a slightly nicer knife to deploy. They're both lockbacks, so that you're not going to get anything as jazzy as the Buck Marksman from either of these, but Cold Steel kind of edges out the Endura in deployment. Thumb stud, thumb hole, really much of a muchness. I like both. The thumb stud is basically out of the way of any cutting you're going to be doing with the Code 4. The obviously thumb hole is just a completely neutral surface, so at worst you get stuff caught in it. So that's really nothing I'm going to rule on. The blade of the Cold Steel Code 4 is far superior to the Endura blade. This passes through all materials better than the Endura blade, with the possible exception of like very crisp apples, maybe. Which could then possibly hit this shoulder after the hollow grind and then split. Then that's just such a minute thing to call it on. This is overall, in terms of steel, in terms of grind, in terms of heat treatment, everything is you're better off with this blade than this knife. I would love to see a handle akin to this one with a blade akin to this one. Perfect knife almost. But yeah, this, even though it's a little bit of a thinner blade than the Endura, probably about a millimeter or half a millimeter or so thicker, the hollow grind really does thin out quite dramatically and is much less sort of friction and stick to any sort of cut through task than you get with the Endura. So look, overall, which do I prefer? It really is about even Stevens with these two. The Endura is great. It's about $20 cheaper. It weighs a little bit less. I find it better in the pocket and I prefer the clip. The Cold Steel has the better blade, probably a slightly less comfortable handle, but it's a stronger knife as well and can sort of definitely move upwards probably a little bit easier into those harder tasks. So either way, they're both excellent choices, and I just think it's an interesting enough comparison. So there we go. So yeah, I've been really pleased with my revisit of the Code 4. Apart from the standard Cold Steel lockback stuff, which I think I call on every Cold Steel, this gap here I don't love because stuff can get caught in it in my pocket. I've actually had my keyring wire, because I carry like a wire keyring, which, hey, that's my decision, but carry a wire keyring, I've had that get caught in there and pick up, and it's just a hook that is not ideal to have for sure. And then the clip is just weird. Like, why? Yeah, I don't know. I would love to see them just have a universal single direction clip that has a slightly higher ramp on it. It just tears up your pocket. It just does. You have to really push it over your seam if you're in a hurry, or you have to really kind of lever it on if you're not. So either way is not ideal, and I would love to see those things change. But I guess what Cold Steel aims to do is make blades that are super knifey and cut amazing and are just great at being knives. And when this thing is open and when this blade is passing through material, it's almost peerless in terms of its geometries at the very least for production knives. It's really well done, and I forgot how good it was. It just reminds me that this American Lawman I've got here, this is the flat grind version, and I think it reminds me of how my first Lawman was, my hollow ground all black Lawman, and it's just that much better, just a little bit better. I would say it's probably almost worth, if you're a slicing type guy, if that's your focus in the knife world, then this is probably the cold steel to get. I like it a lot more than the Recon series. I like the less bulky, less rough handle. Even though it is a bit smoother, I'll definitely take that. I like it more than the Voyager. The Voyager is even more sort of broomstick-like in the handle. The American Lawman is a tough one. I do love this forward finger choil. I feel like I've got a little bit more control with it, but even still, it's close. It is close. So I don't know, I really do recommend the Code 4. It's getting towards being one of these really proven knives. It took a lot of my crap and it kept on going. I really, really like it. That's about all I can think of to talk about the Code 4. If you've got any questions about it, I guess ask me in the comments. But yeah, it seems to be a knife that really can take a beating, whether or not you'd want it with this handle in the really, really rough stuff. But if you're just after a great, larger, robust EDC, it's a great choice. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next video, okay? Goodbye now.